Okay, with chapter 9, once you open up the PowerPoint presentation, before we get into it, I did put a link that I recently found for the pros and cons of Title 9. I know we are past that, you've written your paper, but I thought some of you might be interested. It's a pretty easy, specific, detailed list of the pros and cons of Title IX and some of the issues with it and the things that really make it great. So I thought maybe some of you might be interested in seeing that. So I did put that link there. So we're starting chapter 9, which is the social class. And this chapter is really going to discuss, does money matter in order to be successful in athletics? And that would be the kind of conversation as society as a whole. Does having money make you have the potential to be more successful? This chapter, is really going to focus on resources people have, the type of sports people are able to play due to the resources. This first slide here in resources, a form of money and power and influence. Really influence what sports you play, when, where, and how you play them. The beginning of this PowerPoint is going to define social class, which is really, definitions, putting people into categories based on their income, their wealth, their job, their education, social connections. So there's a lot of different definitions here. Class relations, make sure you read through that. Class ideology, which is, again, those two key words, ideas and beliefs that people use to understand essentially where people are at economically, okay? Continuing on down, I want to get to slide 10, class relations and power in sports. The most powerful people in sports are white men who control the resources and the sponsors and who's watching it. The most visible sports around the world revolve around the meaning that, essentially they revolve around the sports that are most important to the people in power. Power in sports, again, this is kind of reiterating some things. Young people in working class families usually play sports in public parks and schools. So, that they have easy access to and don't take a lot of resources. Sports or social class and sports participation, generally the higher the social class, the greater involvement and influence you will have in sports. So I want you to start thinking about, sports participation really kind of occurs in context of what your lifestyle is. What can you afford? So, one thing I always like to talk to people about is this idea that if you work hard enough, and this chapter talks about the American dream, and it does earlier in the PowerPoint presentation too, if you work hard enough, you can get to wherever you want to be. And that's true to a point. If you don't have resources to get better at something, no matter how hard you work, it may make it incredibly difficult for you to achieve something. So, let's just talk Division I soccer. You want to go play Division I soccer, and you want all the coaches to be able to see you so that you can get that scholarship. Well, you have to be able to attend tournaments or play on certain teams and do certain things so that you can get that exposure. You have to have access to coaches and paying for that. When I lived in Ohio, I worked for the Columbus Crew, and at that time, I worked for their academy team. So in soccer, the academy teams on the men's side are essentially like a direct resource to the MLS, so those programs. And, we're talking, this was, 2008 and 9. So, 10 years ago, I was working for them, and it was for like a 12-year-old player just to join the club. It was $5,000. That didn't include any fees for the tournaments they were going to be entering and things like that. So this is not something just anybody could do. So, thinking through, what sports, skiing, here's another sport. Who has access to skiing? And don't get me wrong, we need to have hills to ski as well, but that's an expensive sport. Golf is an expensive sport. Who is, able to get clubs and be able to get on a golf course, things like that. Continuing on, schools in middle-class neighborhoods have nicely equipped playgrounds. They have facilities for their sports. And, some of these pictures in the slides will kind of show you, but, schools in low-income areas don't have equipment. I mean, we have schools in the Cedar Valley that don't have proper equipment for, their athletes and youth to play. So, it's a really nice concept to say if you just work hard enough, you'll get there. But there's a lot of barriers that kind of can prevent that. Slide 17, there's a really good quote. Nothing is more sacred in sport than the level playing field. It's just too bad it doesn't exist. It now takes more resources and a lot more to compete at the highest level. So it's a true quote. It's just a sad one as well. Public money, private funds. Understand that sport venues are sites for transferring public money to wealthy individuals and private corporations. So, the book will go into detail about how tax dollars are used to help build facilities that rich people own and things like that. Which would you choose? Paying a lot of money to get a brand new facility and maybe a new stadium, things like that. Class and gender relations now as we are starting to get into a lot of these chapters, what you're going to see is everything overlaps. So if we're talking about money, we're going to talk about race. If we're talking about race, we're going to talk about gender and everything in between. They all kind of intersect with each other. So slide 20 talks about how girls and women in low income housing often face the greatest constraint when it comes to participating in sports. Boys and girls from higher income families seldom face any kind of restrictions that interfere with participation. I mean, think about this. After school programs, summer camps, leagues, these all cost money. And so, to participate in these things is not easy. And as a parent of a 6-year-old, I'm telling you right now, even though most of the things that, my son is doing aren't incredibly expensive, it does start to add up. $35 here, another $50 there. We got to make sure we have treats, and he's got to have a new t-shirt, and he's going to have to buy pictures. I mean, it just starts to add up. And again, it's very minimal compared to as he gets older. I know it's only going to get, more financially committal. We'll put it that way. Okay, continuing on, class and gender in men's lives. Ideas about sports and masculinity really vary between class, and understanding that, certain social class groups see sports as a way to earn respect. As we continue on down here, some of the things I want to point out, if you get to slide 26, this is in the book, and I think this is such a good picture to kind of help you wrap your mind around that not everybody has access to different sports and things. So it says, it has a little boy with a bike, and it says, just to do what? If I only had a seat, pedals, and wheels, who knows where I would go? So what this is trying to say is, imagine if we just had the resources, then yeah, maybe I would be successful. Maybe I would be able to get to where I want to go, but I don't have access to these things. So the barriers, the challenges to being successful are so difficult. Continuing down here, establishing the probability of competing in athletics beyond high school. So chapter 14, we'll talk a lot about high school sports, and it's awesome. You're all going to love it. But, this slide here is fascinating when you really break down the numbers. As a Division III coach, I deal with this kind of stuff all the time. Parents, players, they will always tell me everybody's on scholarships. Susie's receiving a full ride. Most of the time it's not true. This idea that there's just all this money out there at Division I and you can go to school for free and play beyond is just, it's a real myth out there. But this slide really breaks down, if you look at the bottom of this chart, the percentage of high school to NCAA, let's look at men's basketball is 3%, just over 3%. Football is just over 6%. That is it. So here, we have over 500,000 athletes in men's basketball, and as a high school athlete, and then it starts to deteriorate after we get as you keep getting each level. So it's not a high percentage of individuals. This chapter will continue to talk about careers and where the opportunities are for women, for minorities, who's getting hired, what kind of money are they getting paid, and there's a real discrepancy in who is really getting access and the opportunities in sports. Sports are organized so that members of ethnic minorities are more likely than whites to be defined as underqualified for their jobs. Job candidates are most likely to be hired, have values and orientations that match the people in power positions. So to put it simply, what they're trying to say is if I was hiring an assistant, my assistant's going to match my orientations, the things I believe in. And really great leaders actually try to find people that are a little bit different than them, but in these power positions it doesn't change. Athletic scholarships and occupational success, the perceived number of full athletic scholarship is totally over exaggerated. 1/3 of 1% of students in NCAA universities receive full athletic scholarships. So I'm going to say this again. I deal with parents all the time telling me how Susie has a full ride to this university. No, she doesn't. She does not have a full ride. She might have 70%, she may have 80%, she may have 50%, but she's not going there for a full ride. Especially in women's soccer, to get a full tuition scholarship is so rare. You're talking about the big dogs, and if you know nothing about soccer, that's like UNC, Stanford, maybe Notre Dame, Penn State, like those are the big dogs in soccer, and maybe they're handing out full scholarships, but that's not happening in this area. Athletic scholarships are awarded year to year, but athletes are obligated to be committed for 4 years. So I was a Division I athlete for 2 years, and then I transferred. So one thing I like to kind of point out, now that this was a long time ago that I was a Division I athlete, but how that worked was I got a scholarship coming in as a first year. And then at the end of my first year, after the spring of my first year, my freshman year, my head coach sat me down and we discussed my scholarship, whether it was going to decrease, whether it was going to increase or stay the same. Here's where it really got interesting. Lucky for me, my scholarship actually increased after my freshman year. I had a great freshman year, but two of my roommates didn't increase and my other roommate did. And to have those conversations was terrible. But what this slide is pointing out is that I transferred, and we said that, like, I then had to go to my coach and I had to get released, but he could kind of decide how much money I would get. And we'll get into that kind of stuff more too, college athletes getting paid, things like that. Class relation and ethnicity is related to who receives the sports. Many students, this is the biggest thing I want to point out, many students with athletic scholarship aid would attend college without such aid. So what that is saying is someone like me, we'll use me as an example, I got an athletic scholarship to go to college. I was a student that essentially still could have went to college without any aid, because I did. I ended up transferring and coming to Wartburg, and obviously Wartburg was not only more expensive, but I was not receiving a athletic scholarship here anymore. So that's something to think about. The majority of student athletes who get a scholarship actually are the ones who could afford to go to college. So the last slide here, again, just kind of, most college athletes do not have athletic scholarships apart from, Division I, men's and women's basketball. So it just kind of is reiterating. I know this was a little bit longer of a, video, so I hope you found this helpful for Chapter 9.